In Chapter 8, you learn the method for finding the x-intercepts of the parabola. You found the roots or zeros by making the equation equal to 0. That's an important part. We need to start by making the equation equal to 0 before we can do the zero product property. So we're going to minus 9 on both sides. So now our equation is 0 equals 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. Then the zero product property is factoring. So we'll do the rectangle and diamond. We put in the 3x squared and the minus 15. If we multiply those, that is negative 45x squared. And we need the numbers to add to 4x, just as a reminder, here and here. Our numbers are going to be 9 times 5 is 45, and if we did 9 minus 5, we would get 4, and they would multiply to negative 45. So we put in 9x at negative 5x. We look for that common factor. 3x times x would make 3x squared. 3 times 3x times another 3 would make 9, and 3 times negative 5. So we write our factors, x plus 3 and 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. Now we do our zero product property and solve for x. So we'll do x plus 3 equals 0. If we minus 3, we get x equals negative 3. Or 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. If we add 5 and divide by 3, we get 5 over 3, or 1.66. We could always check our answer by going back to the original equation, plugging the number in for x, and making sure that it works. But factoring is not the only strategy you can use to solve a quadratic equation. We can also use something called complete the square. So this problem is not factorable. If you do the box and rectangle, nothing multiplies to negative 1x squared, but yet could add to negative 6. Just because it's not factorable does not mean that there's a no solution. Instead of doing factoring, we need to do complete the square. In complete the square, we start with the rectangle, we put in the x squared, but then we stop, and instead of putting in the negative 1 diagonal, instead we take the negative 6x and split that in half so that half goes into each corner. Because when you combine negative 3x and negative 3x, it would add to the negative 6x. So to make x squared is x times x, and we would need a minus 3, and if we multiply those together, negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Our square has positive 9, but we're only supposed to have negative 1. So to go from positive 9 back to the original equation of negative 1, we would need to take away 10. So the way that we write our complete the square is x minus 3 is squared. We have to take away 10 to get the original. That's the process of complete the square. Now we're solving for when the equation is equal to 0. So we'll make our complete the square equal to 0. So to solve for x, we can start by adding 10 on both sides of our equation. And so we have the x minus 3 squared is equal to 10. The hardest step for people to remember is that they know to get rid of the squared, they can do the square root on both sides of their equation, but they forget that there should be two answers. Remember, anything that gets squared becomes positive. So a negative number squared or a positive number squared could make that 10. So when we do this, we're left with x minus 3 equals not just the square root of 10, but we put this plus or minus so that it could be a positive or a negative. And then we solve this twice. Once when x minus 3 equals the positive square root of 10, and once when x minus 3 equals the negative square root of 10. You can convert this to a decimal. So square root of 10 could be 3.16 or negative 3.16. Then from here we can add 3 on both sides. So we get an answer of 6.16 or negative 3.16 plus 3 is negative 0.16. This is just one example. I'll quickly do one more with complete the square to solve for x, or in this case m. So we'll start with our box and rectangle. This has to be a perfect square, so after m squared, we'll take this middle term and cut it exactly in half. So from 12, we will put 6m in each side of our square, which tells us the dimensions of our square are going to be m and 6 by m and 6. So to start writing this as a square, we have m plus 6 squared. And we have to figure out what we're missing. So 6 times 6 is 36. Our square has 36, but we are supposed to have 37, so we need to add one more, plus 1. And now we're solving for when this equation is equal to 0. So as we try to solve this, to get the m by itself, we're going to minus 1 on both sides. M plus 6 squared is equal to negative 1. And to get rid of the squared, we will do the square root. So we get m plus 6 is equal to, and then when we reach this point, the square root of negative 1. You cannot square root a negative number. As of now, it is called a no solution. So this entire equation has no solution, meaning it has no x-intercepts. It will never come down and touch the x-axis. With any quadratic problem you're solving, it's possible to have no solution, one solution, or two solutions for x, like the 2 we got last problem. Now we're going to learn one last solving method. You can use factoring to solve for x in a quadratic. You can use complete the square to solve for x in a quadratic. And lastly, there is something called the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is special because it will work on every quadratic equation that you're trying to solve. Factoring only works if the x-intercepts are whole numbers. Complete the square only works if you start with a single x squared in the front like this. But quadratic formula works for any numbers. So I'm going to tell you the formula. I'm even going to sing you a song, which is embarrassing. And you're going to memorize this formula for the rest of your life. So the formula, goes like this. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it's like Pop Goes the Weasel. And I'll tell you what these a, b, and c are in a second. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so the a is the number here in front of the x squared. In this case, the a is a 1 because there's no number in front of x squared. The b is the number here in front of the x, so in this case the b is negative 3, and the c is the number that comes alone by itself. So in this case the c is negative 7. And you want to make sure that your equation always starts with an equal to 0. Now we fill in the formula. So we've got x equals negative b. This b is already negative 3, so we switch negative would make it positive 3. Plus or minus square root b squared. Make sure you put it in parentheses in a calculator. Minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. My recommendation is to start with this thing under the square root. Don't put the square root symbol into your calculator yet, and just see what you get underneath there. So in this situation, negative 3 squared would make positive 9. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 7 is positive 28. So underneath our square root, the number that we would have is 37 all over, and 2 times 1 is 2. Now we can use a calculator and do the square root of 37. That will be our next step. And I just keep rewriting the parts that I haven't solved yet. So x equals 3 plus or minus. The square root of 37 is 6.08 all over 2. And now the last step, when we want to get 2 answers for the x-intercepts. We split this up once where we used a plus sign, 3 plus 6.08, then divide by 2, and once where we use the minus sign, 3 minus 6.08, then divide by 2. All right, 2 answers for x-intercepts are 4.54 and negative 1.54. The quadratic formula can be challenging, but as you do more examples, you get more comfortable. I'll do one more with you. This is one of your homework problems, and I will just do problem A. So the A, the number in front of the W squared, is a 1. The B is the number in front of the W, so that's 28. And the C is the number that's alone. And so now we fill in the quadratic formula. X equals negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC. And use parentheses to remind yourself to multiply and to square all over 2A. First step, if you're using a calculator or your brain, is this under the square root part. We need to do 28 squared and minus 4 times 1 times 52. Now we rewrite our problem. X equals negative 28 plus or minus square root. And I calculated the number under the square root is 576 all over 2. You can double check that in your own calculator. Then in my calculator, I'm going to actually do the square root of 576 and rewrite my work. X equals negative 28 plus or minus, and the square root of 576 is 24 all over 2. That's where we split it apart into 2 problems. Once when we're doing negative 28 plus 24 and dividing by 2, and once we're doing negative 28 minus 24 and then dividing by 2. So our first answer, negative 4 divided by 2, is negative 2 as an x-intercept. And our second answer is negative 26. For homework, you're going to solve the rest of these problems, except I use this as an example for a quadratic formula. You are not going to solve these using quadratic formula. You are going to, in the homework, follow the directions and use complete the square to solve these problems. So reminder, complete the square is where you make the square, fill it in, split this piece in half, and then solve for x at the end.